All right, it is 12:30. So I will start off by saying thank you for joining us. I'm Dr. Megan Holmes. I'm the co-director of the Center on Trauma and Adversity, along with Dr. Jennifer King. And we are just thrilled and grateful to have Aviva Vincent, Dr. Aviva Vincent with us. She is a graduate of our doctoral program at the Mandel School, so she is an alumni, and she has done some really impressive work in the area of animals. And so what I want to share just briefly is that she teaches for us at the Mandel School at Case Western Reserve University, but she also teaches at the University of Tennessee in the Veterinarian Social Work Certificate Program. So without any further waiting, I will pass it off to Dr. Vincent. Thank you.
Well, I have to first thank you, Dr. Holmes, for giving the space and the ability to bring this material forward. And also that Dr. Vicki Dessner, I believe, is on the call or was signed up to. And I have to give acknowledgement and thanks to her. She is actually the champion behind this House bill as it was brought forward. She did the legwork through the Animal Welfare Institute over the last 3 years. And frankly, she could be sitting here giving this presentation much as I am. So giving it with her present definitely, gets my heart racing a little. So thank you very much, Vicki, for your tireless work to move this forward and for already getting started on the next round of legislation on behalf of animals and humans. So shout out to Animal Welfare Institute and Vicki.
Thank you so much.
Yes, of course. There you are. Yay, you are here. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and get us started. We are going to be talking pretty frankly about both animal abuse, child abuse, elder abuse, domestic violence. So as professionals and as practitioners, I know that you will do what you need in terms of self-care. But if you need to step away at any time, take a break, take a stretch, get water, you take care of yourself. I'm going to talk pretty frankly about these different areas of work and how they overlap and how that comes forward into this mandated reporters of animal abuse. So as Dr. Holmes had mentioned, I'm bringing this forward to you from both my work as a co-owner of the only veterinary social work practice here in Northeast Ohio called Healing Paws, and in partnership with the Veterinary Social Work Certificate Program out of the University of Tennessee. I am a researcher of the human-animal bond, and I teach both with University of Tennessee and Case Western Reserve University. At the very end, I'll share a little bit more about how you can learn more, stay involved, stay engaged, and one of those avenues is through the International Association of Veterinary Social Work. You hopefully will take away from this that all of our work has touch points with humans and animals, and thus you are part of this association by nature. So check us out, join us, we're here for you. And the picture is with what I would call my collaborator. That's Shayna. She is a 14-year-old lab who is now retired. She was a therapy dog. We did a lot of work in the community here in the Cleveland area. And now she is my companion of all things on Zoom. So why are we even having this conversation to start with? So I'm going to go ahead and use the chat a little bit here, and I would love to ask, and Dr. Holmes is going to keep an eye on it for me, but in general, how many of you have pets of your own currently in your homes? Lots. How many of you have lost a pet? Either had to be rehomed, had to be put down, ran away. Yeah. So lots of us have had pets, lots of us have lost pets. How many of you consider your pet to be a family member? Lots and lots of very strong yeses. That's why we're talking about this today. Now, the caveat to this is that we end up almost that idea of like preaching to the choir. Those who tune into webinars like this tend to be also the ones who are like, yes, I get it. I know why this is important. And those who aren't here are the ones that we have got to do the legwork for. So my hope is to both help educate and provide some background for you, but then also to give you some of the language and resources and tools to help have this conversation with other people as well. So last question for the chat. Do you know someone who has experienced pet abuse or violence? Yeah. That's a lot of yeses coming through. Got 2 no's and a whole lot of yeses. So this is very common. And unfortunately, it's also very common here in our own community. And that's why this is so important to talk about today. So throughout the United States, there's a lot of pets homed. So really what we're talking about here is really dogs and cats, domestic pets. But that 67% of households throughout the US have at least one pet in their household. Here in Ohio, I believe the most current statistic actually puts the number of domestic cats higher than the number of children, which is quite a lot of cats. And this is also important from a financial standpoint, especially during times of COVID, where families are incredibly hard pressed for finances. The pet economy is a huge allocation of dollars. And even during times of financial distress, families that budget for their pets tend to continue to spend their budgeted amount. So if I have budgeted $1,000 per year annually for my pet, I will continue to take care of their veterinary needs, their food, their boarding, the vitamins, the groomer, the toys, the whatever else that it needs so that they're happy and healthy, even if that means that I might have to cut back in other areas. And part of the reason for that is because majority of people, 80% by the ASPCA, there's another American Pet Product Survey that puts it up to almost closer to 90% of pet owners regard their pet as a family member. And we saw it just a little bit here in the chat. Right? So of course we're going to provide for them like a child because we see them like a child or a sister, a cousin, a sibling, a member of our family. And that's actually a relatively new change if we think about our history with animals. So really we had pets as property pretty historically and then kind of coming current. And then in about the 80s, 90s, we started to see this shift where pets were inside a little more. We saw a shift in some of that language, a shift in some of the social capital around the animals. And really in the last 20 years, there has been a very big shift towards pets taking more of a central role in our homes and our lives. And historically, we've seen this shift where it actually is a little bit different, where the Department of Animal Protections was actually established before the Department of Child Protections. And though it's a very complex case, the like one-liner headline to it is essentially a child. The case is little Mary Lou Ellen. A neighbor suspected some domestic violence going on in the house and thought that she might have some elements of abuse or neglect, and called and reported to the Animal Protection Agency rather than child protection because it didn't exist yet. And so that was one of the first cases of a welfare worker going into a home to help address the needs of a child. And they were an animal welfare agent. So we've actually seen this shift in how we actually address animal abuse and welfare concerns and child abuse and welfare concerns. So there's always been this overlay, but we haven't really had any legal background or protection to support our profession in getting involved. So we mentioned this thing called veterinary social work. What is it? Why does it matter? And how does it affect us? So veterinary social work is social work at the intersection of the human and animal bond. It has been a certificate program in effect for just about 10 years now. And the education component covers these 4 areas that you see here on the screen. So animal-assisted interventions. I noticed in the chat, somebody said they had a therapy dog. That's really where that comes in. So the hospital programs that have therapy dog programs or therapy dog visitors that'll come in, having animals assist in PT and OT, therapeutic horseback riding, going to the schools and doing reading programs. All of those are animal-assisted interventions. And that's actually the module that I teach through University of Tennessee. The link between human and animal violence or interpersonal violence and animal abuse, that is what we're going to be sinking into today. But that is understanding how animals in the home can mirror the dynamics of people in the home and why we need to be concerned as social workers. Animal grief and bereavement, so loss of a pet or a beloved animal, and how that affects people. We've actually seen a very strong rise in animal loss support groups facilitated by social workers and mental health practitioners. And because all 3 of these areas really do involve interpersonal experience and professionalism, as well as some really hard conversations, a 4th component is compassion fatigue or emotional resilience and conflict management. So when you complete all 4 of these modules, you end up with a veterinary social work certificate. Now, If you're saying, I already do this work, then yeah, you might be doing veterinary social work without the certificate. And that's very likely. And we've seen that quite a bit in practice. But what we're trying to do through the social work program is actually say, okay, if you're doing this work, how can we better support you and get everybody on the same page? So today we're really going to be talking about this link content and touching a little bit on the compassion fatigue part. So what is the link? So modeled really clearly here, and this is from the National Link Coalition. You can go to their website. It is a phenomenal resource that I will mention several times throughout. Typically in mental health practices and in social work education, we do default to teaching about each of these 4 areas separately, though some courses may have some overlap. So what ends up happening is our education ends up looking in practice like I work in elder abuse, I work in child maltreatment, but we don't always get that crossover. But what we have found is that when there is animal abuse in a home, there is likely going to be other elements that need to be considered. If there is child maltreatment, there is likely other elements that need to be considered as well. And the prevalence of the link through research and empirical work has only been ever increasing throughout the last, I would say, about 10 years or so that the research has really been flourishing. And so some of the lead researchers in this area, like Shelby McDonald at VCU, has been using a very large database to actually say, okay, of those who had experienced child maltreatment or engaged in domestic violence and had hold convictions, how many of those also had convictions of animal abuse? And so there's actually some work being done to actually have a foundation to say, yes, this is an issue that we really need to bring forward. And the link happens at the nexus of these 4 areas. So I want to pause there for a second. Are there any questions in the chat?
No questions.
Perfect.
So anybody that has questions, please just pop them in the chat and then I'll be feeding them to Aviva.
Perfect. I know that this can either be like, yes, I totally get it, or it's completely new. And so certainly chime in with any questions or any experiences. So why is it so important for us to really know about our clients' interactions? Well, part of it is that idea that animals are part of our family members. For some people, for some of our clients potentially, animals may be a vital aspect of their support network. And they may actually be considered confidants. And having an animal in the household may also delay leaving harmful situations. We've seen this in photographs of, pre or post hurricanes, where people are, standing up on the roofs and they're holding their dog and they're waiting for care, or they refuse to leave altogether. Or individuals who delay leaving a domestic violence situation to seek out shelter because the shelter doesn't accept their animals to come with them. Now, there are national initiatives that are going on right now to try to address some of these challenges, such as the co-sheltering initiative, which is federal and local dollars being invested to organizations that are willing to take on the challenge of actually building facilities so that people and their animals can be housed together in shelters. So there are efforts, but knowing that the personal is political, I like to pause here for a moment and actually share like why this is so important. So for me, I had to sit with this for a little while and really think hard about why am I interested in this work? Why do I care so much? Where do these heartstrings come from? And when I think about it, if as a kid, somebody had asked me to draw my family, I absolutely would have drawn, with the dog in there. And if somebody had asked me, what do you do after school? I play with my horse. Oh, what's your horse's name? Shasta. Where do you like to do with your horse? I like to visit her world. Okay, well, that sounds different. That's not going to the barn. What do you mean going to her world? Well, we like to leave here. Oh, are you exploring or adventuring? Escaping. I'm totally escaping. Well, what are you escaping? Home. Why are you escaping home? Home's not safe, right? So it's having a conversation with a young kid to learn what's going on in their home through the lens of their interactions. And if somebody had dug in deeper, they would have known that there was violence in my home and that the dog was absolutely beaten before the humans. And that's what kind of unfolded for me as I dug into this. And I was like, oh, wait, this really is personal and it's political. and I can use my experience to better understand the lives of people who are engaged in or working through some of this and move it forward so that it doesn't have to continue to happen, doesn't have to be perpetuated. We can help. So I share that just as a framework of, if we don't ask the questions, we don't know. And maybe you do ask the questions, but now you're going to have the resources and tools for what do you do with it? What comes next? So one of the main intentions when I had originally reached out to Dr. Holmes is to say, okay, how do we get out to the community to say, what do people need to know in practice now about this new legislation? But also, how can we start including in the education, so even before we get to practice, about the importance of across the lifespan, across curricula, asking questions about pets to all different members across the lifespan. You know, what happens if you're working with an elderly individual and they say, oh, I have a support network, I have Sally. And then in conversation, you learn Sally's a cat. And that person really is isolated, right? So if we don't go further and we don't acknowledge the roles that pets have in our lives, we may miss a whole lot of very, very important information. So as we start into this idea of what is abuse, I apologize, but we're starting with a whole lot of ambiguity. So on the slide here, you have 3 or actually 4 different definitions of animal abuse. And the reason for this is because we really haven't yet, as a practice, defined what animal abuse is, and nor have we defined what it is socially. So we have some ideas, and there are some common themes, but we don't have consensus. Now, if you go to the legal standard, like what police go by, yes, there is a standard, but it does not actually help us in practice as social workers. So what does abuse and entail? Kind of socially unacceptable behavior that intentionally causes unnecessary pain or suffering, but was socially unacceptable. You know, any act that contributes to the death or pain of an animal. Well, what happens if you're hunting and it's sport or it's for food? That's not necessarily intended abuse. Although I will say, in the human animal interactions class I taught at Case, the first semester I taught it, my students got into a very strong debate, it was wonderful, about hunting. And half of the class said it is abuse, and the other half said, absolutely no, it's not. And we had a really great discussion. And just like this definition, we were left somewhere in the middle. Also, it could be a pattern of deliberately harming repeatedly and unnecessary vertebrate animals. Well, this gets us a little closer, but it's only vertebrate animals. What about everybody else? So then we end up with Brown's definition of unnecessary suffering inflicted on a being with pain induced by physical or stress. And that's kind of where I sit with it. You know, it's again, we end up with a socially unnecessary, which is really challenging because we have a different hierarchy in Ohio of animals than people do in other countries and potentially other states and other cultures. But it at least gives us a starting point, again, for conversation. Now, the takeaway from this is that as social workers, you are not responsible for substantiating abuse. And I will say that over and over again throughout this. You are not responsible for substantiating abuse. So in any of these instances, if you were working with a client and you got that ugh feeling, like something's not right, I'm not comfortable, that's enough. And I'll give you a little more detail in the coming slides about what may make you feel that way or what could validate your feelings, but that's what we're looking for. But understanding at a higher level that abuse is complex, right? That it's okay to not know exactly what abuse is.
Aviva, can I ask a couple questions out of the chat?
Yes.
So there's one question that says, I live in an area where hunting is a significant part of the culture. Can you expand on the hunting component more? And then a second question, is animal abuse considered a felony?
Okay, so the first one, so it's just a point of conversation, really. So I'm not taking a stance that hunting is or is not abuse. Frankly, I think that if individuals are trained to hunt correctly and they're utilizing it as a source of nourishment and food for their family, by all means. And I understand that it's a sport as well. I have family that absolutely engage. This is just one of the definitions that were put forth earlier, earlier-ish in 1998 on in the literature. That when we say an act that contributes to the pain or death of an animal, that literally could mean hunting. And so that came up as part of this dialogue and conversation. And it's just worth noting and having a conversation about, but it does not, I'm not taking a stance either way, nor am I encouraging anybody else to. Regarding the felonies, we're actually going to get, or states that have felonies, we're going to get to that in just a couple of slides. So I'm actually going to pause on that one for a moment. So really, there are 4 types of abuse: neglect, hoarding, physical, and sexual abuse. Hoarding, I'm going to ask you to hold off for 1 second. So for neglect, physical, and sexual abuse, they really parallel directly to interpersonal violence. So the idea that they're typically inflicted to control, retaliate, satisfy a prejudice, that follows through for the animals as well. As practitioners, they're typically qualified under conduct disorder. Now, why is this so important right now? Right. Well, part of this is about acculturating children to socially appropriate behaviors so that we can have healthy adults. So we know that one of the strongest predictors of later abuse for children is engagement in animal abuse or observation of animal abuse in childhood. So if children go on to perpetuate abuse if children perpetuate abuse of animals in their youth, they will typically, 1/3 of children will go on to actually perpetuate abuse of other persons. We've seen this in the case of children and youth who have engaged in school shootings. Many of them track back, almost all of them track back to engaging in animal abuse in earlier years. So there's definitely a need to address early on. And then we see later on in the years. Now, the problem, what you see on the right-hand side of the slide, the problem with this information is that these are of individuals who have been convicted. So we end up with a typology of males 31 to 50 years old um, who are, kind of identified as those who will potentially commit animal abuse, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's who's reported or suspected. So we have a little bit of a challenge there that the field is currently working to unpack and do a better job with. However, in the known data set, individuals who have been convicted of animal abuse are 5 times more likely to commit violent crimes. And also there's been this last point on there, the point about there has been studies that have shown the correlation between childhood animal abuse and later abuse. So the data is there to support that this really is a very large issue that needs to be dealt with across the lifespan and by a plethora of providers, from child through adult, animal welfare to social work, veterinarians included, because it is so indicative of what happens in later life. Again, just a subset. So again, these are women who did successfully leave a domestic violence situation and were in a shelter. So it's a very specific typology of person. However, of those who were included in this 2012 study, 74% had owned pets. 71% of those pets had been threatened. 57% were harmed. And 18% of the women delayed seeking shelter because of their pet. And honestly, I believe if one person has to delay, that is too much. That is why these co-sheltering initiatives are so important. Now, remember how I said, please, hold off on the hoarding for a second. We're going to come back to it. So hoarding is a little bit different. So hoarding is arguably the least discussed aspect of interspecies violence. Rather than being a conduct disorder, it's considered an addiction. And so as practitioners, we need to treat it and treat the person as though they have this addiction and be able to really support. So if somebody has too many of a specific animal, cats, and we just go in and say, you're abusing your cats, you're neglecting them, and we take them out, and we do not help with the addiction, and we do not treat the person, then they will go out and likely get more cats or something else, but they will engage in this addictive behavior again. So we have to help the person as well as the animals, and understand that hoarding is not necessarily just having a lot of animals, but it's having a lot of animals who are not getting appropriate food, water, shelter, socialization, and veterinary care. And it's all 5 of those. So you can have animals who are fed and watered and have veterinary care maybe they even have shelter, but they're not socialized, right? So you have cats who are feral, right? That's not okay. And that's what this is saying. That's a hoarding situation. So that also counts. So as you now with this framework of human-animal interaction and what you can ask of your clients, what you can kind of take note of, what I would encourage is if you're doing home visits or over Zoom, which is actually a blessing in disguise because granted I have a tan wall behind me, but you could see a little bit and you could hear maybe my dog, you know, kind of whining and settling in behind me. You could say, "Oh, can I see your dog? You know, can you introduce me to Shayna and I can show you?" And you can kind of take a look and say, does she look healthy? Does she look good? Right. So you can actually get a glimpse into the lives of our clients because of this use of Zoom, which is kind of nice. But in conversation with our clients, you may actually be surprised by some of the content that comes up in conversation. So somebody may outright just admit direct involvement in cruelty. It's happened. Okay, you know, you can't lose your poker face, and you go on and you follow through with what needs to happen. An individual may have a lack of restraint or a lack of remorse. They also may engage in a variety of cruel acts. Um, the other piece of it is, and it goes back to that complexity with defining abuse. There may be a variety of socially valuable animals engaged in these different acts. And what I mean by that is this goes back to that cultural piece. So what do we consider a socially valuable animal, right? So as children, we've all probably stepped on an anthill, right? Um, I know that I have absolutely giggled at my dog trying to chase after a rabbit or a squirrel because I know she's never going to catch it, but I let it happen and that scares the other animal, right? So I've allowed that to happen because in my culture, my dog is more valuable than the rabbit or squirrel, right? I grew up in a community that I guarantee at least one of the boys in the neighborhood shot BB guns at the squirrels up in the trees, and the parents did not care, right? Um, but we did not cry when the fish died in the fish tank. But I mean, it was sad, but we got a new one, right? When I have lost a dog, it has been very sad. I'm still not over the loss of my horse from 10 years ago, right? So there's a socially valuable hierarchy to the animals, where in my culture, in my world, horses and dogs and cats are very high. I don't have much touch point with livestock, and wildlife is valuable, but it's not as valuable as the pets that are in my home or that I financially invest in. Now, that may be completely different in other cultures, in your home, in other countries. So understanding that socially valuable hierarchy is also important to understanding the context in which abuse, neglect, sexual violence, or maltreatment may occur. For the animals considerations, things that you're looking for to kind of engage these conversations again: food, water, shelter, socialization, and veterinary care. Untreated illness or injury, condition of the animal, and whether it's overly aggressive or timid. So there was a clinician that I know of who did home visits, and everything was, you know, she did her job very, very well. She hadn't had exposure to this. And then after having completed some coursework, she did a home visit, and the child presented fine, the mother, the father, they all kind of, you know, she talked with them individually, they were all fine. The child and the mother were in the room. The dog came in, dog's, you know, laying on the floor eating a bone. And the father came back in, and the dog literally wet itself. And she was like, "Oh, something's not right." The dog didn't ask to go out, right? It was a spontaneous reaction and a little bit of dog behaviors. Like that's a very submissive behavior. And so she was like, something's not right here. And so she just kind of like let the light bulb go off, and she asked further questions, and she found out that there was abuse going on in the household. So some of this again is just awareness. It's opening your lens and your framework and having kind of the confidence to ask questions.
Aviv,
Yes.
sorry, my mute went off. Would this be a good time to ask a couple questions?
Yes.
Okay. So one question is there a difference with injury inflicted to animals by kids who have been traumatized, who are more acting out of their trauma or impulse versus who are violent or aggressive towards animals? And then the second question is, do you have a tried and true script for mentioning the mandated animal abuse reporting role in an engagement period of therapy?
Yeah, so really, really good questions. So for children, I do think that it's important for us to have that sensitivity that the treatment of animals may be coming from a variety of different experiences. So if a child observes the way a animal is treated for a number of years in their, early formative stages, and then they go on to perpetuate the same behavior, that's very different than having an outburst and, engaging different, counter to how they've been raised. Um, and so I would say that that's the job for us to kind of unpack what's going on here. Um, I don't know how, in how many situations you would have the ability or the opportunity to watch one family member engage and then the child engage. And so it would be more of like, tell me, where did you learn those skills from? Or, where did you learn how to pet your dog like that? Who taught you that? Or, what's, do you think you're being rough? It's having those conversations and asking and listening to what the kids share back to you. I definitely think that engagement of experiences of trauma will shape how a child engages with the animals. Absolutely. Um, the second question about how to say it, honestly, this is no different than talking about child abuse. We're mandated reporters of child abuse. If I learn of something that's concerning to me, regarding the engagement with animals or pets in your home, I will bring that up to you, and I will, here are the things that I'm going to have to do. So for example, it would be, I might ask that we just do a welfare check of your animal at home. I'm going to explain in the next couple of slides exactly what this policy entails, and includes, and it is really no different than what you would do for a child. I actually think it might be a little bit easier. I think having to say, if I hear of child abuse going on in the home, that would actually be a more complex conversation. But certainly being able to say, we can make a call together, or I can make it on your behalf, but we're going to do a welfare check together. So going back to that first question, how many states actually have felony level statutes? So again, the National Link Coalition's website is wonderful because it lists out all of the states and what their current laws are, as well as who to contact in every single state by county. So beautiful, beautiful resource. Currently, though, mandated reporting completely varies by state. Many states categorize animal abuse as a misdemeanor offense, for a first-time offense, and that's counter. It goes against the other states that may have felony statutes, in part because that definition of animal abuse differs. Right. So if Ohio uses X definition and New York uses Y, we may have a very different way of prosecuting. So one of the initiatives behind all of this work is trying to get some kind of uniformity across states, both in terms of practice, who do you call, how do we report, what does it look like, as well as what are the charges. So very much variance, and we're working on reducing that variance. So what is the bill and what are you actually accountable for? So it is Ohio specific legislation. It is an amendment to an existing act. It's also called the red flag law. So that's another way that you may hear it. So we had the sponsors of Representatives Lanice and Carruthers. And as I had mentioned, Vicki really championed this on behalf of both animal welfare and social workers, helping to bring statements forward to support the representatives as they move this legislation forward over the last 2 years. The full text is available. Now, there are two kind of different sides of this policy that are really great. One side is that it did keep consistent language. So companion animals, licensed veterinarians, protective services, and officers all remain the same, and then added in social service professionals and older adults. So we got added into this legislation, which is really wonderful. And I would argue that I do believe that the older adults got added in because of this link, right? So when we think back to the link model, if we're talking about suspected animal abuse and there is an elder person in the home, if we understand how this model of the link works, then we also have to be accounting for elder abuse. So it's one of the main reasons that now this legislation covers all 4 of the areas. So the bill actually includes how to report, what should be included in a report, what to withhold or when, civil immunity, and warnings for penalties for false reporting or not reporting. If you've done work in legislative policy, this is huge. Usually, in my experience, bills will say mandated reporting should happen. Done. But to have a bill that actually says mandated reporting should happen, the avenues for reporting need to be X, Y, and Z. This is how reports should be made. This is whom they should be made to, and providing civil immunity for those who are reporting in good faith and as professionals. Like that doesn't happen often. So this was an absolutely huge win for this legislation. The core part of the legislation is this cross-reporting theory. So the idea is that if we can do cross-reporting, we're also doing preventative work. So if I understand that there may be suspected animal abuse in a home, and animal abuse may be a precursor to interpersonal violence, then by me calling and placing a report for a welfare check, and checking out both the animal and the people in the home, I may be able to prevent future abuse of both people and animal. This also adds the dog wardens and animal control officers to a list of abuse mandated reporters. So that's also huge because we're actually putting the animal welfare and the human welfare in alignment with each other and saying we need to talk to each other. It also adds in that veterinarians are mandated reporters as well. So there was a story, I think a year and a half ago that went, viral and was very prominent in the news about a woman who had a dog in the home who had been abused. She had been trying to get out of the relationship. She couldn't get out. She finally said, look, I need to take my dog to the vet. She was able to do that. He waited in the car. And while she was inside, she requested support. She said, I'm in need of help. Please get me help. And this has happened more than once. But there was a particular case that was kind of on the news. But so this idea that veterinarians can do and can help, and they can help us do our jobs as well, is just emphasized in this bill. And it does require communication. So how many of us feel like sometimes our work is in a silo, right? So this bill actually says, okay, no silos. We're going to work together. I like that. So this is an example of how this mechanism for cross-reporting could work. So veterinarian, social service professional, us, and any other person licensed as a counselor, social worker, or marriage and family therapist must immediately report abuse of a companion animal to an office when that person has knowledge or reasonable cause to suspect that such abuse has occurred or is occurring. Similarly, officer, dog warden, or deputy dog warden must immediately report abuse of a companion animal to an appropriate social service professional when a person either has knowledge or reasonable cause to suspect that abuse has occurred or occurring, and or suspects that a child or an older adult resides with the alleged abuser, suspects that abuse towards the companion animal may impact that child or older adult. So now we are all talking together for the first time, which is wonderful. So how to actually report. So this applies specifically when we are acting in our professional or official capacity. So this isn't, I'm home late from work, my neighbor's dog is barking off the walls, I'm frustrated and want to go to sleep. I look outside, they're outside, the dog's outside, it is 0 degrees out, that's not okay, right? I can call as myself. I cannot call in my professional capacity, okay? Our role is not to investigate or substantiate. It is not. So everything else that we've gone through so far, if you get that feeling of something is not right here, you can call in your professional capacity. But you are not responsible for investigating or substantiating. Now, if something happens right in front of you, you absolutely can say, here is what I witnessed. Absolutely. But you do not have to have evidence of your feeling or your instinct. In this regard, you are reporting in good faith. which means that you will have civil immunity and criminal immunity should anything come of those reports. This applies to companion animals, which right now is dogs and cats. So remember back to those definitions of animal abuse where we go vertebrate, invertebrate, right? This comes full circle to what is actually covered now. So under this legislation at this current time, it's dogs and cats. It does not include livestock, which unfortunately horses are listed under livestock. So even though they're very prominent here in Ohio, and there have been a number of cases about animal abuse and neglect, maltreatment for horses, those are not covered under this bill. It is dogs and cats as they reside under our roofs. Reporting is not standard across the counties. And so you can use your best judgment around law enforcement, humane society agent, or animal control. However, there is also kind of an indicated go-to for each. And I'm going to give those to you in a moment.
Eva, could we ask a couple questions?
Yes.
Okay, so there's a clarifying question about what about other indoor companion animals such as rabbits, parrots, etc. Are those included in this?
They are not, to my understanding, they are not currently included. They're not considered companion animals under the current language.
Okay.
Dogs and cats.
And then there was another question that gave an example of a case they have where there's two dogs that have been neglected. So they're matted, looking like they need to be fed. Is that a reportable instance? Is that so neglect is considered under abuse?
Yep. You have abuse, neglect, physical abuse, neglect, sexual abuse, and hoarding are 4 different elements within abuse. So absolutely neglect counts. And it doesn't mean that we're going to go into this, but just for the sake of this question, it does not necessarily mean that that animal will be taken away, right? So if this is about education, if this is about help needing resources, especially here in the Cleveland area, we have the APL has a CARES project where they can go out and do a welfare check and some education and provide resources and help. So there is support, but then there's also, okay, this person does not understand, they're not willing to learn, they don't want to invest in this animal, there is a problem here, and this animal is not okay in the home, and then they will follow through as needed.
Is declining medical care for a dog or cat counted as neglect as well?
So that's not necessarily, and that's where we would probably want to loop into the veterinarians who are also included under this legislation, because you can say veterinary care in terms of not getting your Lyme disease vaccine, and that's not necessarily neglect. But if a dog's mouth has completely rotted out teeth and they cannot eat, and so now they're malnourished because that care is too expensive, that is something that we would need to address. And that's where we really see the intersection of both veterinary social work, financial support, and having tough conversations, meeting in with the legislation about there is something going on here. How can we support the best that we can, but also address the needs right now?
Thanks, Aviva. Last question, and then I'll let you keep going. Are the reports anonymous?
They can be, yeah. Yes. My understanding is that they are anonymous, or they're, so you receive the civil and criminal immunity. My understanding is that they, if you're calling in, they might need some kind of contact to be able to follow up with their questions, but that doesn't track to actually sharing your information.
Aviva, could I add one useful resource? A lot of people, in regard to the issue of like if there isn't appropriate vet care, certainly we've experienced during this COVID time especially, there are some people because they're low income, that they just are having trouble making ends meet to get that vet care. There are 2 sources out there that we can refer people to for emergency grants. One is Red Rover in California. They actually have a whole emergency vet grant program. And actually, I just found out today in Ohio, and this is Ohio specific, the Jake Brady Memorial Fund, it's in Avon, Ohio. The phone number is 440-937-4000. They will entertain small amounts to help people out with vet bills. Thank you.
Thank you, Vicki. Those are great. There's also another, I think it's actually called the One Health. It's not One Health Ohio, the medical, but it's One Health and Welfare that provides support specifically for elder individuals who have pets. So if you need a food, reduced food, if you need reduced vet care, they help subsidize. So there are resources for that as well. So that's why it's important to kind of ask more questions. Is this financial or is this choice? Is this harmful to the pet or is it an opinion? So it kind of requires a little more conversation as well. So again, what to actually include in a report. So the name and description of the animal involved, the address or phone number of the owner or person responsible, because typically this will start with a welfare check, the nature or extent of the suspected abuse, and any other information that may be useful. Now, dog wardens specifically are excluded to include information that may jeopardize a pending criminal legislation. My understanding is that if you know that there is a pending criminal legislation with an individual involved and informing them of some suspected abuse of the animal may jeopardize that this would also be constituted for our work as well. So what that could look like is if somebody was engaged in a criminal legislation and adding on a suspected abuse may jeopardize the welfare of an individual in that household. Working with them to potentially leave earlier, leave sooner, something of those natures, like how else can we help them rather than just making the call is absolutely acceptable if it helps to secure the safety of an individual. So this is, again, using our ethical judgment. So examples of where to report. So I was mentioning here in Cleveland, you can call American Protection League and they have the CARES program that'll go out, do welfare checks and help with that resourcing. You'll notice a lot of it is the Humane Society because they're acting as the hub to be able to say, okay, well, how do we identify what's going on with the animal? And how does what's going on with the animal mirror what may be going on with the person? Do we need to have a dog warden to go in? Do we need to have a police officer? Do we need to have humane officers? Do we need to have social workers? What does this actually entail? There are additional links listed below for who to report animal cruelty in Ohio by county. So you can, again, you are going to get the PDF for all of this, and you can end up using those links if it's resources that will help you. There are consequences to not reporting. That's why this is so important as education for us. So reporting, again, includes civil and criminal immunity for those who report in good faith. And again, you are not responsible for substantiating abuse. So if you do not report, the first occurrence is a confidential written warning from our board. Second occurrence is a $100 fine, and subsequent is $500. False reporting carries different. So a 4th degree misdemeanor, $100 fine, and then subsequent offenses, a $500 fine, and potentially revoking our license. So what can you do now? How can you take this with you? So some of you actually may have some of these assessments at the top. Child behavior checklist is incredibly common, and there is a question in there that pertains to animals in the home. So just kind of perking your ears up and tuning in a little bit more. There are actually assessments as well, like the boat inventory, that are specifically for children and their propensity to potentially engage in animal abuse. So you can use additional assessments in your work and practice. If you don't want to be formal and using assessments, ask questions. So do you have a pet in your home? Can you tell me about them? What's your relationship like with them? If you know there's domestic violence, has your pet ever been threatened or killed because of violence in the home? And if there is potential violence in the home, or for any reason of potentially needing to leave. So if somebody lives in an environmentally unstable place, having safety planning in place ahead of time. So proof of ownership, vet records, medications, leash, a harness, food and water, ideally a little bit of the pet's normal food, a special blanket or toy, and if necessary for domestic violence purposes, pet protection orders. And having that just kind of put together, ready to go. Pet protection orders are also relatively new. So the PAWS Act passed in 2019, and that's protecting Animals and Women's Safety Act, and that includes language around pet protection orders, which could be a whole other conversation, but I certainly recommend you to check out the PAWS Act if that is the population that you are working with. So you want to learn more, you want to do more, you want to check out about some specific cases, you want to just join our community. There's a couple different ways to get involved. So we have the Human Animal Interactions Work Group through NASW Ohio. We meet on the third Wednesday of every month via Zoom. You can get the link right off of NASW's website on their events page. It's the third Wednesday at 4 o'clock. We also have a listserv. It goes out quarterly-ish, and I can say that because I manage it. You will not get inundated with emails, but if you'd like to join, let me know by just sending an email. We also have a Facebook page for the work group. You can just put in Human Animal Interaction Work Group, NASW Ohio. It's a very active Facebook page with really good story, like news or empirical evidence or questions and desire for networking. Again, the National Link Coalition. And finally, again, the International Association of Veterinary Social Work is completely free to join through June of 2021. So I recommend check us out, see if we can support you, join us for the resources, and if you like it, stick around. So there are so many other resources here in Ohio for continued learning. Again, I teach both at Case Western and at University of Tennessee. If you want more education in this area, please reach out. I'm more than happy to connect you either to online webinars or individuals to meet for coffee or ways to get formal education and certificate. So please don't feel like you have to explore and learn this content on your own. I can go ahead and open it up for any questions.
Aviva, I just wanted to offer that Jobs and Family Services have asked us to put together a tip sheet, kind of summarizing the animal abuse and neglect one would look for, and with a link at the bottom of where to go to report that animal abuse. So if it would help, I can get that to you to distribute to this audience.
Yes, please.
Okay, yeah, it'll be done around the beginning of March.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vicki. We had one question. When does this law take effect?
So Vicki, I'm going to ask you for the exact date. Is it truly April 6th? That's what I heard recently. I don't know if she's still there. I believe it goes into effect on April 6th. However, it was signed in on I can't talk anymore. In January. And so I would just encourage, like, let's get used to doing this now. Yeah, it is April 6th. Thank you, Joelle. I would encourage, though, get used to doing this now. Ask the questions. If you have a case that feels kind of off, but you're not comfortable calling, get some consultation. Use this time now to act as though it's in effect, because this is new. Even though pets have been with us forever, and I'm sure if you've done home visits, you pet with, you're petting the pets that are in there, whatever. Act as if it's in effect now. Talk with other colleagues now. It goes fully into effect on April 6th.
I should also mention that the Ohio Animal Welfare Federation, and that's the Association of Humane Societies and Dog Wardens, they are looking to do a virtual workshop before the bill goes into effect. So I can also let you know when that comes about, that you can let this audience know, because that will be, your key humane people, being able to exchange and converse with you all as far as, what to look for in the field.
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you, Aviva. There was just one comment that was just sharing her personal experience about recently losing a cat and being appreciative for this talk and giving her sort of a motivation to work towards justice for animals.
Thank you for that. And again, I know that everybody comes into this work, regardless of what part of social work you work in, with some personal drives, some heartstrings. And so, I really appreciate when we can make those connections. And I know this is a hard conversation. We're talking about animal abuse is it's considered the dark side. We talk about animal assisted interventions as the light side and animal abuse and the link as the dark side. And we say that for a reason. It is hard. And being able to sit in that space is really hard. And so thank you for, opening up your minds, your heart, your time, your space to have this conversation and be willing to engage in it. And again, I know those who tune in today are those who are like, yes, I want to know, and I'm part of this. And those who aren't are the ones that we need to work with. So as you're able and as you feel comfortable, encourage conversation and just provide the resources even. And we'll continue to grow in this conversation and be able to support both ends of the leash throughout Ohio.
Thank you so much, Aviva. This has been just really important information. We are grateful for you sharing it.